Hi, I'm Arnold Cabasso. I'm the licensed psychologist at Joannio. I'm also the psychologist for our associated clinic at Cornerstone. I'm going to talk about sexual capacity assessments. According to the United Nations, persons with disabilities have equal needs to access sexual and reproductive health care services as those without disabilities, and have similar requirements for family planning and childbirth. However, misperceptions about persons with disabilities and the assumption that persons with disabilities are not sexually active has contributed to little attention being paid to ensuring that persons with disabilities have access to sexual and reproductive health care services. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities states that individuals with intellectual disability, ID, should have the same rights to good sexual and reproductive health as people without disabilities. There are a few tests to assess sexual capacity. There is the SexCan ID, and some agencies made up their own without standardization. Our clinic, where I am the psychologist, uses the Sociosexual Knowledge and Attitude Assessment Test Revised. The SSKAATR uses well-selected pictures and drawings and proceeds in a logical fashion. However, because of the nature of people with autism spectrum disorder, we need to ensure that they have the capacity to have a sexual relationship with the knowledge that entails. In other words, that they and their partner are safe. The areas of knowledge and important issues include anatomy, sexual techniques, privacy, birth control, disease prevention, proper partners, and consenting partner. Let me tell you about a story about somebody I used to work with many years ago. We were forming a sexual group, and we asked if any of them had had sexual training before, and one of them raised his hand, this guy named Robert. I asked Robert what he remembered, and he said, "You're not supposed to play with yourself," which I don't think is what he heard. And then I said, "Is there anything else you remember, Robert?" He said, "If you do play with yourself, you're supposed to put on a vagina." Some people on the spectrum or other developmental disabilities may have the knowledge to proceed with a sexual relationship. Robert, despite saying things wrong, actually expressed his sexuality appropriately. He always used a condom and always respected no. So let me go into some of the actual questions used on this test. The first area, of course, as you would imagine, is anatomy, and it asks general questions. For men and for women, it includes parts of their own bodies, and it goes into much more detail. For a man, it would be about men's bodies and vice versa. So let me go over some of the questions that it asks. For man, eyes, nose, leg, belly button, penis, feet, testicles, and nipples. They are asked to identify a man masturbating, and then are asked, is it okay? Where should it be done? Identify picture of ejaculation, asks what a PSA test is. For a woman, arm, shoulder, mouth, breast, neck, hips, buttocks, pubic area, and vagina. Where does the period come out from? What should a person do if their period is missed? They are asked to identify a woman masturbating. Is it okay? Where should it be done? What should a woman do if she finds a lump in her breast? What is a mammogram? Intimacy. This includes questions on dating, kissing, petting, intercourse, gay sex, etc. Shown pictures of a man, woman, boy, and girl. Asked who should one date? Pictures of people kissing, dating, hugging, making out, oral sex, and having intercourse. What is okay on a first date? After dating a while. After getting married. About two men, about two women. Where do they go? Why do people get married? Questions about two women or two men getting married. Is it okay? Then questions about pregnancy, childbirth, and child rearing. Shown pictures of men, women, and children. Which one is pregnant? How do you know they're pregnant? How long is pregnancy? Shown groups of people. Who can get pregnant? Can a woman get pregnant from the first time of having sex? Can a woman still get her period when she's pregnant? Can you get pregnant when you have your period? Healthy and unhealthy habits while pregnant, such as smoking and drinking. Where does the baby come out from? Where does the mother give birth? Baby care and needs. Diapers, baby food, bottles, levels of supervision, babysitters, adoption, abortion, and miscarriage. The next area is birth control and STDs. shown pictures of birth control pills, IUDs, condoms, Depo-Provera, and a couple sitting dressed. The person is asked to identify the first ones and which one is abstinence. What do men use? What do women use? What is abstinence? Why does a woman take birth control pills? How does she get them? How often does she take them? Why do people use condoms? Where can you get condoms? What should you do if it has a hole in it? What is an STD? Have you heard of HIV or AIDS? What is it? How can you get a sexually transmitted disease? HIV or AIDS. If someone thinks they have an STD, where should they go? Can you tell from looking if someone has an STD? Is it okay to work with someone with an STD? Okay, and this is important, and this is the area that was added on, as you may recall. This test ends with the letter R for revised, and this is the area that was added on to, healthy sociosexual boundaries about children, non-sexual sex, etc., shown pictures of 2 women or 2 men, asked questions about gay sex. These questions, by the way, are not scored. I just ask, is it okay? Shown a picture, a drawing of an old man and a girl. They are asked if this is good or bad. Similarly, about a man touching another man without permission. Similarly, a woman hugging her daughter, both smiling. Questions about public sex, paying for sex, getting paid for sex, using sex in exchange for something, pedophilia, exposure, exhibitionism, voyeurism, appropriate places for private contact like work or classroom, incest, saying no and respecting no, and lastly, rape. Who should they tell? What should happen to them? The most important part are these boundaries: disease protection and pregnancy prevention, which is, in a way, why I don't care about a score. These issues are so important. Last, it's not all or nothing. I've recommended lesser intimacies for individuals who had limited knowledge. I once was asked to test a couple, a man and a woman. They were actually older than I expected them to be. They had kissed each other, and he said he made love to his girlfriend. Of course, the agency that they lived in was very nervous about them and kept them apart. These 2 individuals knew nothing about sex. He knew nothing about what his penis did except go to the bathroom, and they were complete innocents. And I said, there's nothing harmful about them kissing each other. No one's going to get pregnant. No one's going to get a disease or anything like that. And they respected each other's right to say no. Okay, and that's why I don't care about a score. Those kinds of things are even more important. Okay, thanks for coming. By the way, as you may recall, my name is Dr. Cabasso. My phone number is 845-708-2000, extension 1259. I'll be happy to answer any questions or if you have referrals to make on this subject. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tobi Makinde. I'm the Senior Behavior Specialist at Juwanio, and I'd like to welcome you to Autism Resource Training Center. Particularly, I will be talking about social skills and interpersonal development. So let's get started. Some of the topics that I'm going to discuss today is public versus private, sexual development, consent, social media and devices, and whether or not your son and daughter are ready for some of the stuff that I just mentioned, whether it's things that the community brings to you, some of the topics that you're going to have to discuss. These are all the things that we're going to discuss in this presentation. So let's start off with public versus private. In this section, I will discuss the difference between public versus private, a description on what is public, semi-public, semi-private, and private. What behaviors, conversations, and personal information are okay in certain settings. And let's start off with just going into some general knowledge. The general public just assumes that over the course of a lifetime, you gain knowledge of social rules without being taught. This idea does not apply to individuals who have autism. And if you dive deeper, different cultures and social groups also have different ideas of what behaviors are okay in public and private. This is because different groups have different values. Understanding public and private social rules impact 2 types of safety: your own personal safety and the safety of others. So we're going to discuss the public versus private gradient. And this is basically going over the different types of privacies. Starting off with public. Public places are shared places. These are places where people can easily see what you do and hear what you say. Things that you can do in the public are handshakes, high fives, brief hugs, holding hands, a brief kiss on the cheek, or closed lips. These are things that society sees as norms and acceptable of things that you can do in the public. Let's go into semi-public. Semi-public places have some privacy, but are still considered shared public spaces. Examples of what can transpire in semi-public places include personal conversations on topics like dating or future goals, or conversing about family and friends. Moving on, we are going to talk about semi-private places, which are public places, places or spaces that are meant for private use. Let's dive into a little bit more, talking about appropriate versus inappropriate. Some of the things that are inappropriate in semi-private places is if you are in a public restroom or locker room with a stranger and you start singing your favorite song out loud. The reason why it's kind of inappropriate is because you're sharing the space with somebody else. And though it's not too harmful in singing a song that you may like, and this happens more than not, that this does transpire, you still have to be respectful of the person that you're sharing that space with. And also, depending on how loud you are, if that person is having a conversation with someone on their phone, you're intervening in that conversation by maybe that person on the phone line hearing exactly what you're singing, and it's disrupting their conversation. So you have to be mindful of all that. What's appropriate? If you are in a public restroom or locker room with a close friend or family member, and you start singing your song, your favorite song out loud, which I just mentioned. Private places are places where others can see what you do or easily hear what you say. Some of the things that are part of that is how you present yourself, which includes personal hygiene, flossing or clipping of nails, nudity, including bathing or showering, any kind of sexual activity with a partner or by yourself, such as masturbation, kissing or hugging for a long time, or viewing pornography or sexual explicit material. These are all things that you obviously do not do in a public place, but in the privacy of your own home, your own room. Even if you have a shared space with a roommate or you share an office space with others, this is not what's acceptable in these places. You want to only do this where it's only yourself and whatever means that you're using. So basically just remember that you have to be respectful of the people that you're with. And though you may have the urge to do all these things, you have to remember that it's not socially acceptable to do these things in a public place, but you should not go to a private room to do all these things that you desire to do. Public versus private continued. Areas and locations and what's acceptable. So semi-public, it consists of living room or shared apartment that I just mentioned. Personal conversations and general accessed areas. So like we mentioned earlier, these is what's acceptable in semi-public. Public is you would consider to be in a park, mall, or grocery store. And what is acceptable in those places like that, we mentioned earlier, is holding hands, short kisses on the cheek, or high fives. So moving on into private, which I just mentioned a few minutes ago, it would consist of family home, bedroom, and bathroom. The things that can transpire in these areas is sexual activity with a partner, masturbation, personal hygiene. In semi-private, which I gave the example of the singing in the locker room, consists of a locker room, exam office, restroom, or office space. What's not acceptable is undressing. In certain areas it's acceptable, in certain areas it's not. So, for instance, undressing is acceptable in the locker room, but it's not acceptable in an office space. But it is acceptable in an exam office or restroom if you need to change for something. So you just have to be wary of exactly what you're doing in certain areas, or using a bathroom. So, personally, familiarizing yourself with social rules will help you navigate what is acceptable and not acceptable. It is suggested to start teaching your child who has autism at a young age what is and isn't acceptable in public. It is also encouraged to utilize pictures and diagrams to help your child better understand the general rules that we have within our community. So, like I mentioned, definitely start at a young age. You want to, if the individual with autism is not good with just basic conversation and they have a hard time understanding what you may be trying to portray to them in terms of what's acceptable in certain areas, I definitely recommend pictures and diagrams. I also definitely recommend even trials in the community, taking them to certain places and then testing them on what you guys might have discussed through those pictures and diagrams, because there's no best experience than real life experience and actually going through the motions of what's acceptable in certain areas. Obviously, I wouldn't say that you would take them to a public place and say, okay, take off your clothes and say, this is not acceptable there. No, that's not what I'm saying. But to kind of go do a test run of going to a supermarket and saying, do you remember so-and-so, what we mentioned in the diagram with the fruit and the vegetables and everything, what's acceptable in here, and have them go through the notions of what's acceptable in this area or arena or in this social setting, and just test their knowledge through that. Obviously, it's not something that is going to be picked up fairly quickly because there's definitely some challenges there. But just with repetition, I do believe that they'll be able to gain an understanding of what's acceptable in certain settings. Moving into sexual development. Puberty is a period of human development when a child's body matures into an adult body. The changes people experience during puberty are physical, emotional, and sexual in nature. Discussions that should take place with your child who has autism are the following: explanations of his or her body parts, emotional changes such as feelings or mood changes, and certain bodily reactions to those emotions and feelings. Changes in sexual organs in relation to sex. By doing this, the timing or approach to this conversation may vary with each family, but it is ideal to be prepared and not assume that because my child has autism, this conversation will never have to be had. And that's the number one thing that I, in my field and working with parents and families, they kind of have a deniability that this is never something that they ever going to have to approach with their kid. Your kid shares the space with others in social settings, and they do pick up what others are talking about. So they have to be understanding that this is conversations that may happen in their circle, and they're going to want to know about maybe not understanding exactly what was said, but they'll definitely repeat what was maybe said in their social setting and want to have a conversation with you. So just like any other kid growing up in development, whether they're in high school, middle school, just because your son or daughter may not attend a regular high school or middle school, that doesn't mean that they won't run into these issues or conversations. So you just want to be prepared. And like I said, everyone learns differently. So everyone's stage of understanding is different. So it could be at the age of 15 that your son gains this knowledge, but it could also be at the age of 20. But it's also just good to just prepare yourself that at whatever age they're ready to have this talk, that you have the basic skills that they need to kind of navigate their way through this. Next is we're going to talk about is consent. What is consent? Consent means mutual permission between two individuals for something to take place or occur. Discussions that can be had is different types of boundaries, how to know if an individual with autism can give a consent, social media, and is my child ready? So let's talk about going into more about boundaries. Physical boundaries include physical affection, which an example of that is or are hugs or personal space. Emotional boundaries could be feelings, affections towards others. Sexual boundaries are sexual expressions which are typically physical. Teaching boundaries at a young age allows the individual to have respect for self and people within their home and community. Like I said, they can experience these conversations or these emotions and feelings at different stages. So like I said before, it's better to be ready to have those conversations, and it's to better equip your son or daughter with handling these types of conversations or feelings. Consent is important in any situation involving any of the types of boundaries mentioned above. So a little bit more on consent. Understanding whether an individual can consent. As a parent, assessments/testings are the best way to know whether your child can consent to any of the boundaries listed on the previous slide. Arnie had discussed some of the tools that were used to test whether your son or child is able to consent, whether it's socio-sexual knowledge and attitude assessment tools revised. The results of the test will indicate whether your child is able to consent or not to sexual activity. Below are some examples of what parents may need to teach their child when it involves their safety and the safety of others. So, explaining how to approach a stranger the correct way if there is an emergency without violating their space. The best way is to get their attention verbally without touching, especially during this time of COVID. I think that's more heightened more than ever, that people want to respect their space. So again, the best ways to get their attention is verbally without touching, example, waving or a light touch on the forearm, or if the individual is nonverbal, carrying around a pocket-sized diagram stating an emergency or I need help could also go a long way. So if the individual or your son or daughter is nonverbal, it's good that they walk around with cue cards, and that, like I mentioned before, in terms of going to social settings, that if they are alone or if they're briefly alone, that they're able to use those cards effectively. So you definitely want to go through test runs in certain settings, social settings, to kind of allow them to understand whether they're verbal or nonverbal, how to ask for help, and the appropriate ways to ask for help. Then next, when someone is disturbing your child's personal space, it is important to teach your child the importance of telling others when someone disturbs their boundaries and engages in inappropriate touch. So it's role reversed. It's if your child is basically minding their business and doing their own thing and someone impedes on them, it's being able to teach your child basically how to respond to them and the correct way of doing that without being inappropriate or resending back or giving to them what the inappropriateness that they're sending their way. So verbal communication or pocket-sized diagrams for individuals that are nonverbal are good choices when also in the community when being approached by others who are being inappropriate. For individuals that may have a history of attention-seeking behavior or verbal outbursts, that going into detail is individuals that may have tantrums, that if not getting what they want, they kind of want to bring the attention, knowing that it may embarrass you or the people around you. They might go into tantrums in the middle of public places, supermarkets, parks, whether it's hitting themselves, throwing themselves on the floor, yelling at you, trying to hit you. Teaching them key words and phrases to help definitely go a long way when such stuff arise. But also when they're being approached by others, especially strangers, you want to teach them alert words when real trouble arises, such as stranger, especially knowing, and like I said, there's nothing better than actual runs. Obviously, you probably won't use a real stranger out in the community, but maybe someone that your son or daughter is not familiar with, but you are. So you may be at a supermarket and you know that a neighbor is going to be there, but your son and daughter is not familiar with them. So you may want to use them as keys to help you in terms of things that you've taught them in terms of mentioning stranger while you're out in the community. So as that stranger who's not really a stranger when you're teaching them, but your neighbor comes, you want to test their knowledge as to what you taught them, which is giving out the verbal cue of stranger or bad touch. Will grab others' attention and allow others to intervene. So, which is the purpose. Moving on to social media, websites and applications such as apps that let users create and share content and link up or connect with other people online. Some examples are Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, WhatsApp, Wikia, Snapchat, TikTok, Skype, and YouTube. I mean, all of these things are the rave right now. These are the things that are, no matter what, some 5-year-olds know how to use all these apps, even so more than me. So it's very, one thing that I didn't mention is maybe putting restrictions on certain things. That's a good way of getting ahead of it and being proactive, but also going through the appropriateness of using these apps, because obviously there's a lot of people who use them in different types of ages, with different types of backgrounds, good and bad. So who are looking to do bad things. So you want to teach your son or daughter with autism how to properly engage within these social media devices. Some of the dangers of having social media accounts include attracting the wrong attention, exposing too much of your personal life, exposure to predators, bullying, and being taken advantage of, and which I've seen in my years of working at Juanio and other agencies. I've seen every one of these happen on multiple occasions, where attracting the wrong attention, giving too much information, whether it's Social Security, whether it's ATM cards, debit, credit cards to others, thinking that they're there to truly help them, which is not the case. And exposure to predators who know that they might have a disability, or a developmental disability or physical disability, and purposely taking advantage of them. And then obviously the typical, whether they do go to public school or any other type of program, bullying or being taken advantage of. Continuing, cell phone, tablet, and computer. The apps mentioned on the previous slide can be accessed through these things. Cell phone, tablet, and computer. Through the device above, relationships can become more intimate if the individual is not able to understand the dangers of the internet encounters on these devices. They can become inappropriate and dangerous. Platforms for negative encounters, definitely sexting, sending or receiving sexual photos or messages by cell phone. Sexual photos can include nudity, breasts, buttocks, genitals, etc., but may also include clothed but sexual suggestive photos. Sexting can take place on any of the apps mentioned above. Online dating, searching for romantic and sexual partners on the internet or through cell phone or tablet apps, often through one or more dedicated dating websites such as Tinder, Match, and there's a plethora of others. And this might be veering away from the main topic, but is equally important, is to identify theft, fraud using someone else's private information, usually for financial gain, which cyber thieves prey on individuals with mental disabilities. And I just encountered that just recently with an individual that I see, and she thought she was doing the right thing by giving not all of her information, but a little bit of her information. But with the way cyber thieves are these days, that's all they need. And literally somehow shut her whole computer off. Her computer doesn't work, and we're helping to facilitate her getting a new one with much more security barriers. But these are the things that can easily happen, in terms of just thinking that the person on the other side of that computer is really there for your good when they're really not. Again, if negative interactions that consist of harassment or cyberbullying take place within social media devices, this is considered cyberstalking, which starts off as sending you emails, messages, or calling, but can quickly escalate into personal contact. Utilizing the sex assessment or any assessment will allow you to better understand your child's capabilities, how to navigate age appropriateness, and the level of supervision your child needs. Sexual assessments can help protect your loved ones and others to avoid unsafe situations or prevent unsafe situations. The internet is a great place to connect with friends, online date, develop relationships, and talk about lots of things. Connecting with people online can be fun, but it is important to keep you and your child safe. So, with everything that I mentioned here today, you really do have to kind of do self-evaluation and evaluate yourself based off of what you've taught your child, whether you've had a conversation with them or haven't had a conversation with them. The ultimate question you should ask, is your child ready for sexual involvement? Is your child ready to understand what conversations may be had in their social setting, in their social groups? The ultimate question you should be asking is, am I doing enough to get my child prepared, to get my child ready for anything that can be encountered, basically whether it's social media, if they're on any of the social media devices or apps? Am I ready to answer anything that comes with that, especially if you're allowing it, without restriction? So you want to kind of do that self-assessment to see whether or not. But then also you want to have that assessment done on your child, the tools that Arnie mentioned. You want to have them go through those assessment tools to make sure that they are ready in case anything happens. Are they able to consent? Are they able to understand what certain body parts are? Are they able to understand the difference between a kiss on the cheek, kiss on the lips, the different levels of intimacy? That these assessment tools will allow you to get a better understanding of what your child's capabilities are, whether it's before you teach them or give you a better perspective on what needs to be taught to them. So presentations on sex assessment, Arnie went through that already, but hope you got a better understanding of what your options are, what you can do to get your son or daughter with autism better prepared to kind of handle and navigate life's different life things that life brings in their way, especially when it comes to sexuality and their maturity in that aspect. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. If not, feel free to contact me at tobi.makinde@juwanyo.org, and you can reach me at 845-708-2000, extension 2194. But I'm happy that you were able to listen to my presentation, and I hope to hear from you. Thanks.